Good evening to everyone in Japan and good morning to everyone in Switzerland. Thank you for joining us at the Swisstech in Japan 2021, targeting Beyond Zero Society, Swiss Solutions Towards Decarbonization. My name is Kyoko Marumo Suzuki, Head of the Science and Technology Office Tokyo, Embassy of Switzerland in Japan. I am very pleased to be your moderator today. On behalf of the entire organizing team at the Embassy, we are excited with this opportunity to present to our Japanese audience innovative Swiss solutions in the field of clean tech. Before we begin, please allow me to remind you that this event will be held in English with simultaneous translation into Japanese. Please choose your preferred language on the bottom of the Zoom application. If you have any difficulties, please reach out to us through the chat function. Now, without further ado, please allow me to invite the Ambassador of Switzerland to Japan, Dr. Andreas Baum, for the opening remarks. Ambassador, please.
Dear participants, I am pleased to welcome you to the third edition of Swisstech in Japan, organized by the Embassy of Switzerland in Tokyo. Swisstech is a private-public initiative focusing on Swiss innovation. In Japan, it was launched with the Swisstech Pavilion at CTech 2019. In 2020, a Swisstech Pitchinar highlighted 11 startups in the fields of smart cities, smart health, and machines for human-centric societies. This year, the spotlight will be on clean tech. More specifically, we are presenting Swiss efforts towards decarbonization beyond zero emissions. Many countries, including Switzerland and Japan, are committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions to zero by the year 2050. One of the keys to achieving this are new technologies that will remove CO2 from the Earth's atmosphere. In September 2020, the Swiss government confirmed the importance of such carbon dioxide removal technologies, known as negative emissions technologies, for Switzerland's future climate policy. My country has a strong foundation for achieving the net zero target, namely the already largely CO2-free domestic power supply, internationally renowned educational and research institutions, and a high-level capacity for innovation. Today, we will present to you three prime examples of these foundations. Representing the education and research domain, we have EPFL, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. From the innovation domain, we have two university spin-offs founded in 2016 and 2009, respectively, which are at the forefront of negative emissions technologies. Our hope is that this event will serve as your entry point to connect with a Swiss partner for joint research, project development, to invest in, or as a business partner. At the same time, we hope these presentations will inspire you to find out more about Switzerland and its clean tech. The embassy team that organized this event is ready to support you. Please do not hesitate to contact them using the QR code that will appear throughout the event. Again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Andreas, Ambassador Baum. Now, as our first speaker, I would like to welcome Professor Andreas Züttel of EPFL, Director of the Laboratory of Materials for Renewable Energy. Professor Züttel is a renowned figure in the Swiss clean tech landscape. He has many collaborations with Japan, including his experience as guest professor at the Institute for Materials Research at Tohoku University in 2009, and more recently, as a recipient of a grant for joint research funded by the Japan Science and Technology Agency and the Swiss National Science Foundation from 2018 to 2021. In addition to his academic achievements, he is also co-founder of GRZ Technologies, a startup that aims to store large quantities of renewable energy in the form of hydrogen. We are honored to have Professor Zutto with us today to inform us about the technical and economic impact of a carbon-neutral energy economy in Switzerland. Professor Zutto.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Just switch to full screen. It's a great pleasure for me to tell you here a little bit about the plans to go on carbon neutrality in the future. I would like to start here with a brief look at the history of energy. Without going into details, there was a very important invention, the steam engine, which then led to the use of the fossil fuels for about 150 years before King Hubbard came up with a model for the limited resources, which was later used by Campbell to describe the limitation of the fossil fuels on a global level. And you can see there are many other contributions which bring us today to the renewable energy. The world energy demand is growing, still increasing exponentially, and you can see here, especially after the Second World War, we had an over-exponential increase in energy demand, and a large part of that energy is from fossil fuels. As a consequence, we have a lot of CO2 emission globally. And you can see here where the CO2 emission comes from. This is mainly due to the production of electricity, and then about equal parts from mobility, from industry, and from residential. If we continue growing the CO2 emissions, then you can see here there are two different models. One represented in the blue line, where we have a temperature increase that is linear with the cumulative CO2 emissions, and the black line, which is based on the radiative forcing on the back radiation of the CO2 in the atmosphere. And if we continue to consume the fossil fuels, then according to Campbell, we would reach 2040, we would have used up all the fossil fuels. And if we take the other model where we use the proven reserves, so that's what is estimated to be still in the earth crust as fossil fuels, then it would last until about 2063. Now, depending on which model for the temperature increase we take, the temperature would go up between 2 and 3 degrees if we go to that point here in 2063. However, the renewable energy production is growing exponentially too, and you can see here the most important forms of renewable energy: photovoltaics, wind, biomass, hydroelectric, and solar thermal. They all grow exponentially, and the sum of them even grows more than exponentially and would reach the world energy demand already in 2035. This is very positive news, because it means that within a bit more than 10 years, we could be completely on renewable energy. However, that also has some impact, and I would now like to focus on the energy situation in Switzerland. That's the current energy situation. We have about 1/3 of our energy from renewables already. We have a part from the energy, about 1/10 from nuclear, and the rest is from fossil energy. Switzerland is a special case because there was a decision already in 1912, so more than 100 years ago, that we're going to electrify a big part of the public mobility. And this is due to the fact that we were able to install a lot of hydroelectric power stations and then build a railway, but also tram and bus system, which is mainly on renewable electricity already now. That's why Switzerland emits much less CO2 than the surrounding countries in Europe. We are going to replace the fossil fuels with renewable energy. And if we do so, especially when we focus on PV here, photovoltaics, then you see in the red the production of energy by the photovoltaics, and the bars represent the energy demand over the year in Switzerland. And there is a clear discrepancy. We have a lot of production from photovoltaics in summer, much less in winter, but we have a larger energy demand in winter than in summer. Now, how can we overcome that challenge? One possibility is to produce energy in summer by the photovoltaics and then store this energy with hydroelectric power stations. If we would replace all our fossil fuels by this way, so going to a purely electrified energy economy, then we cannot cover the energy demand of the aviation, but all the other energy demand, and we would have to install photovoltaics that correspond approximately to 1% of the surface area of Switzerland, or roughly the area of the Lake of Geneva. We would need for day-night storage about 30% of the global lithium battery production of 1 year to install, and we would have to build 2 times the number of hydroelectric power stations we have right now, in addition to what we have already. This is a big challenge because we simply don't have the valleys nor the space to build so many hydroelectric power stations. Now, another option is we don't store the energy from summer to winter. We consume renewable energy during the summertime, and then in the remaining 4 to 5 months in winter, we would produce energy, electricity, especially by thermal power stations with natural gas. However, if we do that, then we have a purely electrified energy economy. However, we're going to still emit about 38% of the CO2 we are emitting today. Another option is we produce hydrogen from the renewable energy in summer, and we store that hydrogen in cavities underground. This is technically feasible, and then we would consume the hydrogen all over the year for mobility as well as for residential. Still, we also with hydrogen, we cannot provide the fuel for aviation. However, in order to store all that hydrogen, we would have to build about 30 times the Gotthard Base Tunnel, the world's longest railway tunnel we just built in the last 20 years. And this is an enormous challenge and also involves an enormous cost. Now we can also use the renewable energy in summer and produce hydrogen from it, capture CO2, and then synthesize fuels from which are CO2 neutral, because all the CO2 is from the atmosphere. And this way we can easily store the renewable CO2 neutral fuels. If we plan a system like that, we would have to cover about 4.5% of Switzerland with photovoltaics. That's a lot. That's 12 times the roof area in Switzerland. And then all the rest is technical feasible. The major challenge is the CO2 capture from the atmosphere. We will have a talk about that after me here. And then we produce synthetic fuels, synthetic oil, and this can be easily stored already with today's technology. We can also estimate the cost of that synthetic oil will be about 4.5 Swiss francs per liter. Now, here is the comparison of the three systems, purely electric, the system based on hydrogen storage, and the system based on the synthetic hydrocarbons. And you can see the electrical system is the cheapest, the system based on hydrogen a bit more, twice, 2.5 times more expensive, and the system based on synthetic hydrocarbons is another 3 times more expensive. Now, that's a real challenge on a global level, because when you consider energy demand versus GDP, so we are looking on how much income the energy can produce in industry, then the slope of this line is $0.4 per kilowatt hour. That means if our kilowatt hour becomes more expensive than what industry can produce, we cannot create an income anymore. And this is something we should keep in mind. The renewable energy storage in future has to be economically feasible, so and still allow the industry to produce an income. And one example here, I would like to finish with that, is Germany. In Germany, they have installed a lot of renewable energy in the last 20 years. They are certainly the leaders in Europe in installing renewable energy. And you can see here, they are producing already a significant part of the energy demand, of the electricity demand from renewables. However, when we look at the CO2 emission for electricity production, it even increased over the last 50 years. So that's just showing what happens if we are not able to store renewable energy. Then we will finally not be able to reduce our CO2 emissions with renewables. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Zuttel, for your very informative presentation. I invite the audience to contact the professor directly or through the embassy using the QR code that will be shown at the end of this session. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Gianluca Ambrosetti, CEO and co-founder of Synhelion, that uses solar heat and CO2 to produce clean synthetic fuels, for example, for airplanes. The aviation industry will play a key role for the world to accomplish the goals set in the Paris Agreement. It will also help our Japanese partners travel to Switzerland while still being considerate for our planet. So we look forward to hearing more in detail about the new possibilities from Synhelion. Dr. Ambrosetti, please.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Let me just share my screen. All right. So, konbanwa to everyone. It's my pleasure to show you a bit our take on this very important topic of how we can manage to achieve net zero and beyond. And as the name of the company and the introduction already says, we are tackling one quite a relevant part of the challenge to come to net zero. And these facts, I won't repeat them again, they are known to you. But a little less known fact perhaps is how central liquid fuels are in the today transportation sector. And this is because their unique features, such as the unbeatable gravimetric and volumetric energy density, but also the long-term stability, as Professor Zuttel said, for, let's say, bridging seasonality, makes liquid fuel a centerpiece of the energy transition. And so the solution, basically be able to leverage these features and to use them in the existing infrastructures where we spend billions on it, is renewable fuels. So how can we come to renewable fuels? In fact, the concept is fairly simple. It's basically, if we take, let's say, combustion, where we combine a fuel with oxygen, we burn it, the combustion releases heat that we use for a process, and we land as a chemical product with CO2 and water vapor. We can conceive the reversal of combustion, where we start with CO2 and water vapor, we put in a process energy, and we come to the fuel plus oxygen. This vision allows us to achieve this closed circle. This so central is for a fully sustainable system where basically net zero can be achieved, and where we basically consume on the same time axis on which we produce the fuels. So how can this be achieved in practice? There are a few more or less consolidated pathways to do this. One well-known one is to use biomass to liquid. Nature does it very well, does photosynthesis, and we can use this biomass to come to biofuels. There are some challenges attached to these pathways, but nevertheless, as all other pathways, it will be an integral part of what we do need to achieve net zero on the scale that is demanded. The other pathway that also Professor Züttel already mentioned is power to liquid. I mean, you can do electrolysis of water to hydrogen, combine it with CO2, do reverse water gas shift, produce syngas, and then convert it via Fischer-Tropsch, for instance, into e-fuels. This is also another very promising way. Last but not least, there is the sun to liquid, is where you go basically to the syngas from water and CO2 by using very high temperature generated with solar energy. And this is, of course, last but not least, because this was our way. And what we do use is we use a concentrated solar system to achieve very high temperature systems. This is very high temperatures. This is basically one test facility that we are using in Spain, and we use this mirror to concentrate the solar radiation on the top of the tower. On the top of the tower is where the magic happens, and where via thermochemical process driven by this heat, we split water, CO2, and sometimes methane in synthesis gas, which is then successfully transformed into liquid fuel via standard processes. We do this via three components. One is the solar receiver, where these high temperatures are achieved, the thermochemical reactor, where the reactions are performed, and importantly, the thermal energy storage, which allows us to bridge the night time and produce continuously. This is a very important part of the process. We have a history coming from ETH. I mean, we started in 2013 producing the first drops of fuel in the lab. In 2019, we produced the full system on the same location with a Climeworks machine taking out the CO2 from the air. And we produced the first carbon neutral fuels. And the same thing, we scaled up the system in Spain. And now we really bring the components to the industrial scale. And to give you a bit, let's say, a feeling of how this works, we basically are, this is one component, is the solar receiver. In 2016-17, the basic idea came on how we could achieve these very high temperatures that we need to have to drive our processes. And a couple of years later, we were already building an industrial scale machine to test. Here you see a big part of the team setting up this machine. And this receiver achieved, in fact, the highest temperature ever achieved by any other system, and went to 1,550 degrees and beyond, which is fairly high. I mean, steel would be molten, and you see the image how it glows. Now we want, of course, to go beyond the single components, and we are starting to integrate them. And we do this in collaboration with the German Aerospace Center, and we integrate them on the top of a tower, of a facility tower that exists in Germany, in Jülich, not far away from Jülich, not far away from Köln. And this is how the setup looks. So you see that it's not anymore bench scale, it's not anymore lab scale. It's a system that has a given size, and this is also what implies to build these setups, because yeah, the energy transition, you need to make it with big components. I mean, this is unfortunately not possible with an app. You really need to go into the large scale, and this is what we started to do here. And the next step, which we want to do, and which we are already in an advanced planning phase, is to build the full facility. It's going to be a fairly small facility, but I mean, still, it's going to be an A to Z facility, a system that will really produce the fuels, where we start from really the mirrors to the fuel, down to the fuel synthesis. And this will take place in Germany. We also got financing from the German BMW that is helping us significantly to make this vision possible. And besides the financing, we have also an array of partners. Those are a central part on how we can bring such an integrated and multifaceted technology to scale. And we, of course, have several industrial partners such as Wood, CIMEX, ENI, the German Aerospace Center again, the research institution, of course, ETH Zurich, which is our alma mater, as well as SUPSI and other important institutes. And we have as well interest from the uptakers from the airport of Zurich, as well as from the Lufthansa group, which showed that there is a keen interest on renewable synthetic fuels. What happens now beyond this first plant is actually the vision to go. I mean, I call this plant that we are going to do now industrial. However, it won't be a commercial plant. So the next step is really to build a commercial plant that will produce the fuels on a commercial scale and sell these fuels. And this is what we are planning to do until 25, most likely in Spain. And this will be really like the first installation that will produce fuel that will then also sell. And then, I mean, then it will need to go fast and scale pretty significantly. And we want to target by 2030 to satisfy 50% of the European jet fuel consumption, which is already some 0.7 million tons per year. So it's quite already some size. And then scale aggressively to 2040 to reach 50% of the European jet fuel consumption. And this is not only, I mean, what we want to achieve, this is what is needed if we really want to achieve net zero by 2050. So this technology that we are following, or for what it matters, even a competing technology, all of them are needed to achieve these targets and all should be followed. As a final slide, I come to what we do believe within Synhelion is a very central part of this, is that you can produce the fuels at a price that is acceptable by the today's and the future economies, that like the economy and the population can pay for. If the price is 20 times too high with respect to the current fossil fuel price, this will be very challenging. However, we are confident, and this is what this slide shows, that we can really achieve prices of fuels that are comparable with today's reference market price. And let's say lower than other competing technologies, although we are also confident that competing technologies will able to come down with price and to finally enable the transition, this very important aspect of the energy transition, and this aspect are renewable fuels. And with this, I thank you. And if you want to contact us, you can follow us, of course, on LinkedIn and on Twitter. We have a newsletter, and you can also drop me an email at gianluca.ambrosetti@synhelion.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ambrosetti. As we saw in the presentation, the company is ready to collaborate with global industry partners. So please don't hesitate to contact Dr. Ambrosetti directly, as you saw, or through the embassy. If you have an embassy contact, through your contact, or we will also show a QR code at the end again, so that to facilitate your contact.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So we are a little bit ahead of schedule, but I would like to welcome Mr. Daniel Egger, Chief Commercial Officer of Climeworks, that offers direct air capture technology, and which is famous for capturing CO2 directly from air. It will be a special presentation, as Mr. Egger has agreed to include aspects about the company's opportunities, specifically in the Japanese market. Thank you for their special treat, and I shall not stall any further and invite Mr. Egger for his presentation.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here and good evening. Also, thank you very much for attending this event so late Japanese time. So great to be here. In the next couple of minutes, I would like to talk about carbon dioxide removal via direct air capture and give you an insight not only into the technology, but also to explain what role that direct air capture can play in stopping or even reversing climate change. And to start my presentation, I would like to show you a little movie so that you get an impression how direct air capture works. Please enjoy.
The air is drawn into a collector with a fan, and CO2 is captured on the surface of a highly selective filter material that sits inside the collector. Next, once the filter material is full of CO2, the collector closes and is heated to around 100 degrees Celsius. Using the carb fix method, the captured CO2 is then mixed with water and pumped deep underground where it mineralizes and can be stored permanently for thousands of years.
But first, let us start with why do we need carbon dioxide removals and also direct air capture. When we want to stop climate change, when we want to reach the 1.5 degrees target we have set in the Paris Accord, then we need to become net zero by mid of this century. So net zero means that we are not emitting more CO2 to the atmosphere than we are removing from the atmosphere. But this is not enough. In the second half of this century, we need to become carbon negative. This means that we're removing more CO2 out of the air than we're emitting. But how to get there? In a first step, and there's no way around that, we need to reduce our CO2 emissions as much as possible. So we need to switch to renewable energy, to wind, to solar. But this is not possible in all the industries, not with all the technologies. This we have also seen in the presentation from the two other speakers. There are industries which need to rely on hydrocarbons, for example, also in the future. So, for example, the aviation industry will be very, very hard to decarbonize. So, in such industries, we need to see that we can form a closed carbon cycle, so that we take the CO2 out of the atmosphere and need it as a feedstock again to produce new products like synthetic fuels. And then just as a last measure, we need to take CO2 out of the atmosphere and store it. So again, we need to do whatever possible to bring down the emission of fossil CO2. This way to net zero is what we see currently led mainly by industrial companies, by many, many large companies. So we see that over 1,800 companies worldwide have committed to reduce their CO2 emissions according to the guidelines of the Paris Accord. And out of these more than 1,800, we see that Japanese companies are really at the forefront here. So more than 160 companies in Japan committed to science-based targets. And when we also see how many new companies joined this club in the past month, then we see a significant growing amount of numbers of Japanese companies. So Japanese companies are really taking ownership and taking responsibility here to stop and fight climate change. And this is also important because we see that the companies are basically at the forefront of that. So the policy is when we look at that is a little bit behind. So it is basically following what we're seeing from big corporates. But also here, the Japanese government is at the forefront. So it's one of the few countries worldwide which has already a net zero target in law. The yellow one, we see that there are many other countries having this in preparation, but the green dots, they really mark the ones which have this target in law. And there, Japan is definitely at the forefront as well. So the Japanese government and also the Japanese economy are taking a lot of responsibility here in building a sustainable future in regards of mitigating climate change. But what does net zero means? What is the difference, for example, to carbon neutral? I would like to explain the two different aspects, carbon offset and carbon removal. So traditionally with carbon offset, I'm emitting 1 ton of CO2, and I'm paying someone not to emit. But my ton of CO2 is still out there. So I'm basically paying someone to avoid the emission of CO2. Carbon removal, on the other side, is when I'm still emitting this 1 ton of CO2, I take care that the same amount of CO2 is removed again from the atmosphere. So at the end of the day, I'm ending up with net zero CO2 emissions. So what is better? Is it an either or is it an and? The carbon offsets, they're needed to support technologies to reduce CO2 emissions. And carbon removals are responsible for taking care of the removing of the unavoidable emissions. So basically we need to have both, but we also need to do both in a good way. When we're talking about carbon dioxide removals, you're basically talking about two different approaches. We have the nature-based approaches like planting trees, afforestation, avoided deforestation, and then we have technical or engineered approaches such as direct air capture and storage. So when we look when to apply those different families of carbon dioxide removals, then we see that currently the market is dominated by so-called nature-based solutions. This is simply because of the availability of the credits you have in the market. So this market is still very limited and will also remain limited in the next coming years. And today, the majority of the available certificates are in the nature-based solution area. On the other hand, we also need to think about what do we need, what kind of solutions do we need in the future to really solve the problem. Carbon dioxide remains in the atmosphere for many thousand, 10,000, or even 100,000 of years. So we need to see that the CO2 is also stored for the same period of time. So for example, when you plant a tree, 100 years later, the tree dies, and you need to see that the CO2 is captured again by planting a new tree. So you need to redo your solution over and over again. This means that the durability or the permanence of the solution is rather low. So that's where we have engineered solutions where you can secure a long durability, a long permanence to really make sure that you have the right climate effects. But it's also scalability. Currently, there is simply not enough space to plant enough trees to solve the problem. So we need to have other solutions with a higher efficiency to support that. I'm not saying now you shouldn't plant trees. Of course not. You should plant trees as many as possible, as many as you can, but it's simply not enough. We need to see that we combine different solutions in your portfolio so that you can address the right problem at the right time. And this means that if you set up a portfolio of carbon dioxide removals, take care that you have different technologies in your portfolio to have a complete picture and formulate a set of solutions which also helps you in the future. Now, talking about carbon dioxide removal from Climeworks, I would like to start with this slide. This shows the installed fleet we have. We have installed some 14, 15 plants so far all over Europe. And this is really important for us because direct air capture also depends on your local conditions. This means if you install a direct air capture plant in Italy, where you have rather warm and rather dry conditions, it's something different than from Iceland, where you have low temperatures and a rather humid environment. So you need to see that you have a broad experience, a broad installed field to cover different aspects as well. The project I would like to talk now is the project which we have in Iceland, so the one up here in the north. There, we're capturing the CO2 with one of our plants. This plant is called Orca, and this Orca plant is powered by renewable energy from a nearby geothermal power plant. So we mainly get the heat, but also electricity to run our plant. The CO2 we're capturing will be then mixed with water. So we're basically creating a highly concentrated fizzy water. And this water is then pumped deep underground, several hundred meters underground, where the CO2 starts to react with the local rock formation. And this happens very fast. So after about 2 years' time, all the CO2 has reacted with the local rock formation, and this is then basically turned into stone. And by doing that, it is stored safely and also permanently. The water then again is heated up, consumed by the geothermal power plant. And by doing that, we also form a closed cycle of the water consumption. Here are some pictures to make it a bit more tangible. So what you see here is one side of the Orca plant. So you see a lot of ventilators drawing the CO2 through the collectors. So remember the movie we have just seen at the beginning of my presentation. The CO2 is then sent to those little houses here or installations here, where the CO2 is then pumped underground. And what you see here on the very right side, the white spots you see here on this drilling core, these white spots is CO2 which has been turned into stone. So you can compare it with black marble. So the white stripes you have in the black marble is nothing else but what you can see here with the white spots. So again, if you're thinking about setting up a carbon dioxide removal portfolio, here are three, in our point of view, the three main criteria which you need to consider. First of all, you need to exactly know what you're doing. So capturing CO2 out of the air needs to be measurable. So you need to see that what you're doing, you can also measure and it is traceable. You need to see that you have solutions which are also matching the demand, the future demand of your emissions. And you also need to see that what you're doing is not creating other issues, so that you have lasting climate benefits. So these are three criteria which might help you to set up a portfolio of carbon dioxide removals. But what is also important is that I mean, this is a service which is quite intangible. So you're basically buying a certificate and you need to trust the company you're working together. And that's why we're working together with different companies, worldwide known companies like Southpol, but also the Mitsubishi Corporation in Japan, to build up a framework for certification so that we have a third-party verified solution, so that you can also be sure that what you're buying is real, so that you have no double accounting and that the CO2 is really stored underground. And this collaboration also with Mitsubishi helps us to set up such standards, to set up a certification scheme that in a couple of months, we can also issue credits based on a third-party verified process. So again, maybe to illustrate a little bit what is the part of Climeworks. So what we have seen before is that when you emit the CO2, you need to have a provider which is removing the CO2 again from the atmosphere. And this is exactly what Climeworks is doing. So you're removing the CO2 again from the atmosphere to enable a net zero future of you or of your company in the future. Some references to illustrate with which companies we're working together. An important name here is definitely Microsoft, which purchased so far 1,400 tons of our carbon dioxide removal services. Here also you see that 1,400 tons, of course, is a big volume, but Microsoft is emitting around 16 million tons of carbon dioxide. So what we're doing is just a tiny part. Over time, we're enlarging definitely the fraction of our service. And then the most recent agreement we have announced is with Swiss Re. This is a Swiss reinsurance company, one of the world leading reinsurance company. And there we have signed a 10 years contract for carbon dioxide removal worth around $10 million in total. So why are companies like Swiss Re or Microsoft working together with companies like Climeworks? I think one which is important is that they have an understanding that climate change is important for their business case, so that in future, if climate change is not stopped, it will affect their business. That's important, and many companies start to realize that. And the second thing is they start to think about what kind of solutions do I need to have in my portfolio in 10, 15, 20 years, and they also evaluate the readiness they have today. So they're also supporting with their investments into technologies to enable them to scale, to be ready in 10, 15 years to really make a difference. Today, we're still too small scale. So we need to see, and there, I mean, we see similar ways, similar pathways as we have seen in Gianluca's presentation. We need to see that the scale up can be very, very fast to really make a difference. But, and that's also not to neglect, this also gives you a differentiating factor in the industry. So the deal with Swiss Re, for example, was also in the newspapers in Japan. So about a small Swiss company doing a deal with another Swiss company, and this really was amazing us to see that also the Japanese journalists were picking this topic and also consider it worth to talk about that. But also in the United States or in Europe, such topics, such stories are important, and companies also start to differentiate themselves to create additional brand value for the corporate and for their own employees and products. So we would really welcome some of your companies, or all of your companies, to join the journey of being pioneering companies using high quality removals and help companies like Climeworks to enter this scale-up phase fast, to make carbon dioxide removal large scale a reality really, really fast. Thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to discuss with some of you then in the breakout session in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Egger. As you have seen, you may also contact Climeworks through the Swiss Business Hub Japan at the Embassy of Switzerland. Also, if you would like to reply to the email that you received for the link to this presentation, this is also another way to contact us. We are all one team at the embassy, so please don't hesitate to use any route, and we are very happy to connect you with our Swiss experts. As Mr. Egger said, it is very important to have different portfolios for decarbonization. We are very happy to be able to present to you three very excellent examples of approaches from Switzerland in this important field. So again, for connecting with Climeworks or Synhelion or EPFL, you are very welcome to do so directly. They are also on their website. The contacts are also on their websites, or through the Swiss Business Hub Japan or Science and Technology Office Tokyo, both at the Embassy of Switzerland in Japan. We can be your first point of contact based in Tokyo. And for this purpose, you will see a QR code very soon. Please also visit the swisstech.jp website, which has information on the speakers and the startups and the academic institutions, and also government institutions that you have seen today. We will also update the site with our contact information soon. So we are a little bit ahead of schedule still, but this concludes all of the presentations for the Swisstech in Japan 2021, targeting Beyond Zero Society, Swiss Solutions Towards Decarbonization. I would like to thank all of our participants, our speakers, and sponsors, including Present Switzerland, the State Secretariat for Education, Research and Innovation, Swissnex, Switzerland Global Enterprise, and Switzerland Innovation, as well as my colleagues at the Embassy for enabling this event. Again, we are very much looking forward to hearing from you, the audience, with any questions or comments, or simply your impression, through the QR code that will be shown shortly. Here we are. And we are very much looking forward to supporting you to connect with our Swiss experts. Thank you again for joining us today. If you have registered to join us for part 2, please log off from this Zoom meeting and join us for the using the other link that you have received, especially for part 2. And thank you very much to everyone. Please join us at the next Swisstech and other related events here in Japan and in Switzerland. Stay connected and see you very soon. Thank you very much.